Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Brazil once again, and we're going to have a look at yet another of the Brazilian beers that I bought from Beer Dome down in the Netherlands. So as I've told you in my previous Brazilian reviews, I've been very impressed with the standard of beer that I've had from Brazil thus far. I'd long heard that there was a very strong craft beer scene down there, but it's only quite recently that a number of the breweries have started to export over here to Europe, and like I said, I've had some really nice beers. But long may that continue. I hope that we start to see even more of the Brazilian breweries exporting over here, and I hope that we start to see some things from the other Latin American countries as well. But Beer Dome in the Netherlands is a very good place to get a hold of the Brazilian stuff if you're interested in it. It will cost you a little bit more because Mercosur doesn't have a free trade agreement with the EU, but who knows, that might change in the future. But for the quality of beer that you get and for the novelty of it, I'd say it's worth paying a little bit more to try some of these things, and I've certainly enjoyed the Brazilian beers that I've had thus far. But yeah, for this review then, we are going to have a look at a collaboration brew. Both of these breweries, of course, are from quite close to each other though. They've never featured on the channel before, and they seem to be quite highly rated, so I have to say I'm very curious to see how this one turns out. So fingers crossed it makes for another interesting review. Hopefully it's a good beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, both of these breweries hail from the state of Minas Gerais, which is in the southern part of Brazil. For the home brewery, we are going to go to a little place called Nova Lima, which is near Belo Horizonte. The away brewery is from Belo Horizonte itself, but for the home brewery we're having a look at my very first beer from Koala San Brew. So this beer comes from their Terpene Chronic series. It's called Wedding Cake. It comes in at 10.5% ABV, and this one is an Imperial Stout. It's brewed in collaboration with Cerveja LIFT, who are a kind of gypsy brewery, if you like, and they do some really interesting things. They've got quite an interesting story. But yeah, this Terpene Chronic series seems to be very, very highly regarded, so certainly cool to be able to review one of these for you here on the channel. But yeah, the Koala San Brew and Cerveja LIFT Terpene Chronic's Wedding Cake, 10.5% Imperial Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. Very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about both the breweries involved here before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery websites, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Koala San Brew and Cerveja LIFT. The very first time I'm trying a beer from either of these breweries, in fact, but hopefully not the last. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Brazilian beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to quite a bit at the moment because I do still have a couple of Brazilian beers to work my way through. But as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Koala San Brew then, and then we'll go on to Cerveja LIFT a little bit later. So yeah, Koala San Brew, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Nova Lima in Minas Gerais, which is quite close to Belo Horizonte in the southern part of Brazil. But the company was founded by Gustavo Simone back in 2014. So he's a former professional drummer, and he also holds a degree in business administration. And while he was still playing music, he began to homebrew as a bit of a hobby. But he saw a picture of his great-grandfather who had owned the Gambrinus brewery in Belo Horizonte, and this pushed him to actually turn his homebrewing activities into a commercial business. But the name Koala is Gustavo's nickname, and he decided that he was going to use this for the brewery because he thought it was quite an attractive name. But in the beginning, Gustavo had planned to seek finance from one of the banks to build up his own facility, but he soon found that this was very, very difficult, and so he had to rescale his original plan to 25% of the original size. But he settled on the Jardim Canada neighbourhood of Nova Lima for his premises because it's an industrial area that's quite close to Belo Horizonte, and he also had personal knowledge of the area as well. But the first beers were produced here back in 2014, and over time this area has apparently become a bit of a hub for other craft breweries as well, which is pretty cool. But the brewery has a capacity to produce around 7,000 litres of beer per month, but they produce around 5,000 litres per month at the moment. They've got an on-site tap room, and they say that they focus on producing a lot of different and experimental beers, and many of the beers that they produce can actually only be found within the tap room itself. But since 2019, the brewery has also been powered extensively by solar energy, and Gustavo is determined to embrace sustainability. Apparently he was inspired by New Belgium Brewery up in Colorado in the States to follow this through. But as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 200 different kinds of beer, and they do seem to be very well regarded in Brazilian craft beer circles and in the state of Minas Gerais itself. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Koala San Brew for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you about them for the moment. Let's go on to the away brewery then, Cerveja LIFT. So Cerveja LIFT, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Belo, Horizonte, and this company was founded by Flavio Cremonesi and Guilherme Fonseca and Henrique Mafra, if I'm pronouncing their names rightly. I do apologise if I'm not, but yes. Flavio is originally from Palmeira, but he describes himself as a caipira, which is a Brazilian term apparently for someone who is like, you know, a rural person, like they live in the countryside. But he moved to Belo Horizonte in November of 2016. He spent 12 years as a forest engineer and is also a balloonist, and he's travelled very extensively in rural Brazil, up and down the rivers on boats and by balloon of course. But when he arrived in Belo Horizonte, he decided that he wanted to get out of the forestry industry, and apparently beer was one of the things that entered his list of things that he liked. So he said that the best times of his life were with his friends drinking beer, but he met his friend Gustavo Ziller, who apparently is quite famous in TV circles there. But apparently Gustavo set him up with one of his friends, and he ended up working in a gastropub. But it was through this that he met Guilherme Fonseca, and he suggested that they brew their own beer together, and he in turn brought Henrique Mafra into the fold, and they created their first beer, which was called Lemonade, a saison brewed with Sicilian lemon, and they brewed this together in a 50-litre pot. But soon after this, they partnered up with Capa Preta Brewery to brew a beer in a balloon, and they did this, I believe, in the local area, but they've got plans to do this a little bit later on in the Amazon and also down in Antarctica as well. So this is the whole kind of thing with this brewery. Cerveja LIFT. LIFT of course refers to the whole love of ballooning and things like this. But at present these guys operate as a gypsy brewery, and they brew their beers at various breweries around Minas Gerais, mainly in the Belo Horizonte area. And as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 17 different beers, and they do plan to do more in the near future. But yeah, the main man behind this brewery, as we say, is Flavio Cremonesi, who's an ex-forestry engineer and loves ballooning, and the brewery takes its name from his love of ballooning, you know, Cerveja LIFT, there you go. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about the breweries in this one. But yeah, if you want to learn more about Cerveja LIFT, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all their latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that they've been involved in. But yeah, I think that is about time for us to get on to looking at this beer itself. So as I mentioned to you at the start of the video, this one is 10.5% Russian Imperial Stout, part of the Terpene Chronics, brewed by Koala San Brew. Now, for those of you who don't know, I studied chemistry, of course. So the terpene, a terpene chemical is basically, it's an aromatic chemical, which means it's got like a kind of, you know, a benzene ring in it, basically an aromatic ring. But the terpenes are the things that give you the aroma in various different things, you know, be it cakes or be it fruits, whatever. You know, it's a lot of the times it's terpene chemicals that will give you these lovely aromas and things that get, you know, like vanilla, orange and all of this kind of thing. So yeah, they've called this particular series of Imperial Stouts that they do the Terpene Chronics, and they're basically meant to be big, sweet, aromatic type beers. But yeah, this one, as we said, a 10.5% Russian Imperial Stout. and I'm not sure how many they've produced in this Terpene Chronic series, but this one is a 473ml can, which is 1 American pint. So yeah, for a 10.5% Imperial Stout, this thing is a little bit of a beast. I think I paid about €9 for this beer, maybe a little bit more. I think it was actually reduced, and I think that was one of the reasons why I decided to go for this one, and as well as that, it was another brewery that I hadn't tried anything from before. But yeah, you can see on the can there is the Koala San Brew symbol. You can see the can is sweating a little bit because of the lovely heat that we're getting here in the Swedish summer. But yeah, all of the Koala San Brew Terpene Chronics beers have labels that are quite similar to this. They're just different colours. You can see this one is a kind of fleshy pink colour, if you can call it that. But yeah, 10.5% Imperial Stout, this one should be quite interesting for sure. So let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Really curious to see what it has in store for us. Oh, a little bit of it spraying out over me, but we can deal with that. So let's get this guy out into the glass then. As I say, I've been very, very impressed with the Imperial Stouts that I've had from Brazil thus far. I'd heard that, you know, the fruity sours and things and the IPAs were what you really wanted to try, but, you know, the Imperial Stouts have been really interesting as well, as I've said. But yeah, just wipe my hand a little bit and line this up again so that it looks decent on the camera. Yeah, so that my OCD is happy. But yeah, as you can see then, the head has kind of disappeared, but we'll just talk about that quickly. When this beer poured, it had about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would say medium tan head there. It's not the darkest of tan heads that I've seen, but you can see that it's faded away to be pretty much nothing at the moment, and there's just a little bit of a nice kind of foamy ring around the edge of the glass there. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of it, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there. I mean, overall, it looks very, very nice. But if you shine the light through, this one, you can see there's a little bit of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi sort of coloured edge to this beer, but it's pretty much black as night, this one. So as I've told you in previous reviews, the colour of your beer is determined by 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of the colour of the beer. The length of your wort boil is also going to play a role. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. You know, a big Imperial Stout like this is going to boil, you know, it's going to have a wort boil of 4 or 5 hours, something like this. Any adjuncts that you use and any barrel aging that you do as well will also play a role in determining the colour of your beer too. But those two factors really play more of a role when it comes to, you know, like the Berliner Weisses and the Goses and stuff like this, and of course the Flanders Reds and stuff. Usually sour beers, those two will come into play. But yeah, this one is pretty much a very dark ebony rosewood colour, black as night as they say. But yeah, nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. But I think we can take a look at the aroma now and see how we get on. There's nothing surprising about this beer appearance-wise, so let's do it. Oh, that's kind of interesting. So the thing I'm very curious about with this beer is whether it's going to be like a pastry stout or exactly what it is. But I will say straight away, you know, the thing you're going to notice about this one, it has this sort of, it really does, you say it smells like wedding cake, it really does actually smell like a kind of cake base, this one. It's actually quite spicy, you know, it's sort of, you know, it actually reminds me a little bit of like, you know, kanelbuller. It actually comes across as a little bit almost cinnamony. Although I'm not the best at picking out spices and aromas, but this beer, the backbone of it is quite interesting. It's like an airy sort of, cinnamon cakey kind of thing that you get out of this. This is a really quite quirky thing. I didn't expect that out of this beer. But it's like, it's certainly, the more that you smell of it though, it mellows out and it becomes more like a kind of like vanilla sponge. So I do get wee hints of like a sort of cinnamon spice out of this beer, but then it really mellows out and becomes a little bit more of a kind of vanilla sponge cake. So this is really weird. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this is fair actually. So you do get, it is a very, I don't know if we can term this a pastry stout. It smells like it's going to be a bit of a pastry stout, but pastry stouts I've always found have a little bit of that kind of granola base. This one doesn't. This one is quite sweet rather than anything else on the aroma. But yeah, this beer overall, you can smell a little bit of a kind of slightly cinnamony, spicy sort of thing underneath, but certainly it comes across as quite sort of sponge cakey. There's a little bit of a, there's a little bit of a, say, there's a little bit of a kind of, vanilla. There's a lot of vanilla in this one, I think, as well. So vanilla, cinnamon, and a sort of, kind of quite bright sponge cakey kind of thing. I really like how that goes together for sure. But the, the aroma of this beer, I think, is it's really quite interesting. So on top of all of this, you really have you've got some really, on top of that kind of cakey note, you do get a little bit of chocolatey character to this one. You can smell that there is a bit of a sort of 40-ish, maybe 50% cocoa chocolate in here. So I do get quite a, the vanilla though is giving you a bit of a milky chocolate character to this beer. So certainly some, 30-40% milky chocolatey elements. There's a nice kind of brown sugary element to this. It's a little bit treacly and molassesy, but not too, highly caramelized, not too highly dark and brown sugary, if that makes sense. But yeah. So I think there's there's a bit of a chocolate note in this one. 40 to 50% cocoa. For me, a little bit of a kind of treacly molasses element, but I don't find the treacle and molasses all that pungent in this beer. And generally speaking, I would say the aroma of this beer is not too pungent. It actually comes across as quite mild in its aroma. You get the sort of sponge cakey sort of thing, a bit of the vanilla, and for me, that's kind of about it with this beer, to be quite honest with you. It's a really interesting one for me in that perspective. When you sugar it up, you certainly get a bit more of the kind of chocolatey and brown sugary elements out of it, so you can smell that sort of highly caramelized, treacly molasses element to the beer. There's certainly also, you certainly also get a little bit of the, how would we say, you certainly also get a little bit of that kind of chocolatey element to this one, which I do appreciate. But when you let the beer just kind of settle and calm down, vanilla, vanilla sponge cake, a little bit of kind of cinnamon underneath, but then when you sugar it up a little bit, you get the kind of chocolatey notes in there, a sort of 40% kind of cocoa nut out of it, and you also get those highly treaclized caramel notes out of this one. You get those big heavy brown sugars, which I think are very, very nice. There's one or two little woody and nutty undertones to the beer, which I can certainly appreciate. So yeah, the flavours and the aromas that you get out of this one, I think, are very, very nice. So it gets a big thumbs up from me in that regard. I think that it's quite a sweet smelling stout, this one, but it's quite mild mannered, if that makes sense. I think that's a fair way to describe this one. In terms of hoppy character, I mean, you can smell there's a little bit of earthiness to it. There's a little bit of a kind of floral aromaticity, a little bit of grassiness as well. But otherwise, it's not got too much going on in that sense. I mean, big Imperial stouts are not the most hop forward styles, but yeah, a little bit of grassiness, a little bit of floral character, and as I say, a wee bit of smoothness, a wee bit of a kind of just smooth, earthy character to it as well. But on the fruity side of things, I think there are a few things that are noteworthy. So on the fruity part of the beer, you certainly get a nice little bit of a sharper kind of raisiny aroma to it. That's for sure. You can smell that. You can smell a little bit of a kind of chocolate brownie, cakey kind of thing underneath that, but certainly some juicy plums, a bit of prune in there, and you've also got a wee bit of a, as I say, you've also got a wee bit of a kind of, how would you say? You've also got a little bit of a, you've got a little bit of a, say, kind of blackcurranty, blackberryish sort of thing off of this one, which I really enjoy. So yeah, as we say, the kind of fruity part of the beer in this one is quite cakey and quite boozy in that sense. So the aroma of this beer is quite soft and cakey, but it's got a little bit of a kind of boozy, cakey element to it as well. I think this is really quite interesting for sure, but quite a mild mannered stout, I would say, in terms of its aroma. It's quite sort of laid back in a sense. So take a wee bit of time to enjoy the aroma of this one before you get stuck into it, but I don't think this is the most complex of Imperial Stouts that you're going to come across. But I think it is about time that we try this one then. So this one is the Wedding Cake, a 10.5% Russian Imperial Stout, or Imperial Russian Stout, whatever you want to say, as part of the Terpene Chronic series by Koala San Brew in Nova Lima, to the north of Belo Horizonte in Minas Gerais in Brazil, brewed in collaboration with Cerveja LIFT, who are based in Belo Horizonte itself. Let's have a taste of this then and see how we get on. Slanja, skål, cheers. Or felicidades, I should say as well. There we go. Now, that's quite interesting. It's actually quite similar to what you would expect from the aroma. First off, I'm going to say that it's quite a light-bodied Imperial Stout, this one. It's quite a slick and, you know, easily drinking one. So it's quite different from the other Brazilian stouts that we've had so far, because those have all been big, thick beasts of things. But yeah. So it's kind of interesting, this, because it almost strikes a balance between being very savoury in a sense, but it's also got this kind of wet, fruity character to it. So I like how, I do like how this one goes about its business, but I would certainly say this one, it is a bit of an acquired taste. This is quite different to things that I've had before. So in some ways it's a pastry stout, but in some ways it's not quite that. But yeah, I do like how it goes about its business, that's for sure. I like trying beers that are a wee bit different in terms of character and stuff, and this one's certainly different from what we've had from Brazil before, and generally speaking with Imperial Stouts. This is quite a quirky one, this, for sure. And yet the thing is, you'll find it's actually like this really, you know, it's got that big vanilla spongy cake sort of thing to it, but it's remarkably sweet. Yeah, this is definitely going to be a sipper for the rest of the evening, of course. I'm just myself this evening, so nobody to share it with. So I will just sit and enjoy this one myself, actually. But is that lined up? There we go. But yeah, I don't know, it really gives you that, it does give you a sort of vanilla sponge cake sort of thing into the aftertaste, and you get a wee bit of a sort of cinnamony spice to it as well. This beer, it's the aftertaste that's quite interesting with this one for me. I think the aftertaste really rounds off the beer quite nicely. The flavour itself, you know, when you've actually got the liquid on your tongue, it's quite sort of straight shooting in a way. I think this beer is one of these ones that more kind of leaves an aftertaste, to be honest with you. But yeah, I don't know whether we should describe this one as a pastry stout or exactly what, but yeah. So on the malty side of things, and we'll just try and break down the flavour of this and describe it as best we can. But the backbone of this beer, it really is like a sort of vanilla sponge kind of note in there. But in fairness, well, across the middle third and the back third of your palate, you can feel this sort of cakey, vanilla, spongy sort of thing. But underneath, you do get a wee bit of a kind of toasty bread crust. There is an element of black malt in there for sure, and when it's an Imperial Stout, you would expect that. But yeah, there's a wee bit of a kind of roasty, toasty black malt in there. But on top of that, you get this kind of vanilla sponge element, and within that vanilla sponge, you get, you know, a sort of cinnamon type quality there as well. So I think particularly towards the back half of the middle third of your palate and into the back third of your palate, that's where the sort of cinnamon spicy note starts to come out of the beer. And you know, as we've mentioned in other reviews, the back of your palate is where you're getting the more kind of bitter flavours, and as you move further forward on the palate, generally speaking, it gets sweeter, and that what we're observing in this beer makes sense in that regard, because yeah, back half of the palate is quite cinnamony and quite spicy, but the front half of the palate is more kind of vanilla sponge and slightly sweeter. You know, that's, I think, a decent overview of this beer. But yeah, I think that sums up what's going on in this beer fairly generally, as we say. Brain is not working in this review. But yeah, middle third of your palate. Let's focus on this for just now. So as we say, bit of a roasty toasty backbone to it. Vanilla cinnamon sponge cake. Cinnamon in the back half, vanilla sponge in the kind of front half of it. Then on top of that, we as we say, you get a few other things in there. So on top of that, you get a little bit of a kind of chocolatey layer to this one, and again, it's a sort of powdery kind of chocolate there. So at the back half of the middle third of your palate, you're getting a sort of 70-ish% cocoa chocolate, and as you move further forward, you can feel it becomes a little bit more sort of it feels a little bit more sort of milky in a sense. So it's really it really becomes a little bit more kind of sweet as you go further forward. So as you move further forward, it goes from about 60% cocoa in the back of that middle third of your palate to being a little bit more 30-40% cocoa towards the front. Sitting on top of that, you do get a bit of brown sugar, and you can feel it is quite a highly treacleized caramel molasses kind of thing that you get in this. But these layers are not very thick. This is certainly not the thickest of Imperial stouts that you're going to come across. The layers are actually fairly thin, to be honest with you, and it really, in that way, it really does remind me of a pastry stout. I've always found that pastry stouts are not the thickest of things that you're going to come across. So you've got 4 layers in this beer, and they're all kind of fairly well stacked on top of each other. But yeah, this is not an overly thick Imperial stout by any stretch of the imagination. But like I say, in the very dead centre of that middle third of your palate, you get a wee bit more of a kind of concentrated brown sugary sort of thing that, as we say, we get a little bit of that, treacle molasses sort of thing. As you move further out from that, it's a bit more sweet and caramelly, and then there's maybe a wee bit of a toasty brown sugar further out. But yeah, it's quite an oily, highly caramelized treacle molasses brown sugar that you get with this one. But as we say, bit of roasty black malt, kind of cinnamon, vanilla sponge cake, bit of chocolate, brown sugar on top. Those are the 4 layers of the middle third of your palate in this one. And the back third of your palate is actually quite similar. If you go to the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, again, there's a wee bit of a bready build up there, bready brow, kind of more intense bread crust. But then on top of the kind of cakey layer, if you like, there's a bit more of a kind of yeasty sort of thing coming out of this one. So you can feel the flavour is a little bit taller on the back third of the palate there because of the yeasty elements, that's for sure. But yeah, you get a little bit, of a more kind of yeasty element in this beer. So you can feel that it's a bit, the yeasty element you get in the back third of your palate, it does come across as a bit more cakey. There's a bit of sweet vanilla in there, there's a bit of cinnamon and stuff like that. So I really like that about this one. So the flavour on the back third of your palate is a bit taller, toasty bread crust, cake underneath, and then the big yeasty element in there as well. It's a sort of sweeter cinnamon you get on top of that. So when you start from the back third of your palate and come further forward, you can feel the flavour just condensing down there, and then as you go into the middle third of your palate, it's a little bit more sort of squashed together. So yeah, the malty, yeasty side of things in this beer is really interesting, and generally speaking, this beer is quite quirky, that's for sure. A mixture of, it really is like a sponge cake, this one, to be honest with you. So back corners of the palate, you get a nice little bit of earthiness out of this one. As you move further forward, it's a wee bit more kind of herbal in a sense, and as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, there's a little bit of floral aromaticity there. Around the front curve of the palate, a little bit lighter and more grassy in a sense as well. So yeah, the hoppy side of this one, as we say with an Imperial stout, the hoppy notes take a bit of a backseat to everything else, but there is a little bit of the kind of hoppy remnant character of this beer. But front third of your palate then with this one, so border region between middle third and front third of your palate, there's a bit of a cakey build up once again, a wee bit of a toasty kind of thing, but then the base of that front third of your palate is again, it comes across as a bit more kind of toasty, like a sort of toasty, the edge of the bacon, the edge of the cake, that sort of fires onto the bacon tray, if you like. That's what the base of the front third of your palate feels like. But on top of that, you get that little oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. So at the back of that front third of your palate, you get the slightly more toasty, cakey elements, but we'll just look at those fruity elements for the moment. So it's interesting, you get a wee bit of raisin on top, you get a little bit of a more kind of juicy, plummy, pruny note underneath. It almost has a little bit of that sort of phenolic type quality to it. You do get quite a bit of phenol out of this beer, in fairness, on the front kind of third of your palate, so it really feels a little bit phenolic, and yeah, it feels a little bit kind of phenolic and just oily in a sense, for sure. But yeah, that's interesting. You've got the whole, on top of the kind of cakey roasty layer on this one, you certainly have a bit of a phenolic fruitiness to it. But yeah, raisins on top, a bit of plummy and pruny quality there. As you move further forward, it gets a little bit more kind of datey and pruny, as we say. Then there's a wee bit of a figgy quality, and into the front half of that front third of your palate, black currants and a wee bit of blackberry, that's for sure. So yeah, there's certainly a wee bit of a, there's quite an interesting, there's an interesting few qualities to this beer, that's for sure. Yeah, I really like how this one goes about its business in that sense. It's a beer that grows on me, this one. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but it has grown on me, and I think I'll enjoy sipping on this for the rest of the night. This will last me a good couple of hours, I would think, while I sip through this beer. But yeah, this is definitely worth having a go at for something a wee bit different. And this is quite different to the other Brazilian stouts that we've had so far. The other ones have been quite old school and straight shooting, whereas this one, this is probably, I think this is the first pastry stout we've had from Brazil, and it's definitely a pastry stout, that's for sure. So yeah, interesting beer. Let's round off the review then, the tasting section with the mouthfeel. I can feel this beer going in my head a little bit, actually, so let's just round it off. But yeah, the mouthfeel side of things then, it's actually kind of, this beer doesn't feel too heavy at all. I would even describe this as being mid-bodied or top end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is very smooth, it's got a little bit of slickness to it, that's for sure. And as I say, pastry stout all the way. It really becomes more and more of a kind of pastry stout the more that you drink of it. So yeah, the malt base in this one, it's got a bit of a kind of spicy undertone to it, a bit of a kind of, it's, as I say, cinnamon and vanilla sponge cake. It's really very much like that. That's the backbone of the beer. There's a bit of chocolate and a bit of caramel on top of that, so it's got a layer of sweetness and smoothness on top of that, but it really is quite savoury, very much like a pastry stout in a lot of ways. In terms of the IBU count in this beer, I would say that this one is quite, overall, it is quite, it's quite, the IBU count in this beer is maybe around 40-ish. I think it's maybe around 40 or 50 IBUs. I can't see it being more than that, but that's a mix. You're getting a bit. It's a bit difficult to draw the line between the spiciness and the bitterness in this beer, to be honest with you. So there's a wee bit of spiciness and bitterness in this, but the malt base, as we say, quite savoury, pastry stout, smooth, but a wee bit of sweetness on top, and you've got some interesting fruity notes to this beer. But the fruity notes at that are quite phenolic. But yeah, a very, very quirky beer, this one, and it's definitely worth a try if you get the chance. Yeah, this it is a little bit of an acquired taste, this one. I will be straight up about that. And maybe when it comes to Koala San Brew, it might have been better to try something a little bit more conventional from them as my first beer. So when I do the next Brazilian order, I will see about getting like an IPA or an old school Imperial stout from them. But this was certainly quite an interesting one. It seems with the Terpene Chronics, though, they like adding fruits and various random things into the beers. But yeah, this is an interesting one. I'm sure we can definitely say that, that's for sure. But yeah, I think that's a nice place to round off this review then. So this one was the Wedding Cake, a 10.5% Russian Imperial Stout from the Terpene Chronics series by Koala San Brew in Nova Lima in Minas Gerais in Brazil, brewed in collaboration with Cerveja LIFT from Belo, Horizonte, a little bit to the south, if I remember rightly, I forget. But yeah, these two breweries in very close proximity to each other. But an interesting review, this one. Always nice to review new Brazilian beers for you, and we'll leave it at that. So yeah, thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Do check out my social media. Check out the brewery's social media there as well. You can follow them on Facebook, Instagram, all of these kind of things. But this was a really, really quirky Imperial Stout, this one. So let me know your own thoughts on it in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are, both from Koala San Brew and from Cerveja LIFT. And do let me know any other Brazilian breweries that I should be checking out. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out the brewery's social media, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.